What if Britain, the nation everyone wrote off as a fated empire, was quietly building the most advanced military in Europe? The fall of the Berlin Wall didn't just end the Cold War, it marked the beginning of Britain's retreat. Defense budgets were gutted, squadrons disbanded, entire fleets sold for scrap. By the late 1990s, the once unstoppable Royal Navy had withered, the Army had shrunk to its smallest size in centuries, and the world had moved on without it. The Empire's heirs seemed content to trade warships for welfare and power for politics. But history doesn't retire that easily. While analysts sneered and rivals grew comfortable, something extraordinary was happening behind closed doors. A silent revolution. Britain wasn't fading. It was recalibrating. Beneath the surface, billions were being funneled into a new kind of arsenal. Sixth-generation fighters, directed energy weapons, stealth frigates, and nuclear submarines that would one day shock the world. The fall was real, but it was never final, because when Britain re-emerged, it didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. The same island that once ruled the seas had re-engineered itself into a 21st century war machine, quieter, faster, deadlier than anyone imagined. What if the empire never truly ended? It just evolved into something even more dangerous. The Cold War's end was supposed to deliver peace. Instead, for Britain's armed forces, it delivered an identity crisis. In 1989, the Union Jack still flew across oceans, from Gibraltar to Hong Kong, from the Falklands to Cyprus. But within a few years, the sound of marching boots had been replaced by the quiet hum of budget committees. The politicians called it a peace dividend. In practice, it was disarmament by stealth. Between 1992 and 1997, the Ministry of Defense endured a series of brutal cuts. 6% in 1992, 4% in 1993, 5% in 1994, 7% in 1995, and another 7% in 1997. By the decade's end, defense spending as a share of GDP had collapsed from 4.1% to 2.4%. Entire squadrons vanished. 33 tornado jets were scrapped before they ever left the ground. The Army fell to 116,000 troops, its smallest strength since the Napoleonic Wars. Britain, the nation that had once built an empire on steel, coal, and gunpowder, now seemed embarrassed by power itself. Successive governments slashed without remorse. Generals retired early, bases closed, young officers left in frustration, realizing the uniforms they wore no longer guaranteed purpose. The humiliation wasn't just statistical, it was spiritual. British forces who once set the global standard are now deployed with aging equipment and shrinking fleets. The Royal Navy, once the pride of the seas, began decommissioning ships faster than it built them. By 2010, the carrier Ark Royal was retired. Its Harrier jets sold to the Americans for spare parts. Even America, Britain's closest ally, began to wonder if London still mattered militarily. The country that had once defeated Napoleon and Hitler was now arguing about whether it could afford tanks. At home, the tabloids called it the Great Unarming. Abroad, adversaries barely took notice. For the first time in modern history, Britain looked like a spectator in the global power game it had once defined. By 2017, defense spending had hit rock bottom in real terms. The armed forces were stretched thin across token missions, a destroyer here, a training team there, while rivals invested in hypersonics and cyber warfare. Britain's global presence withered to symbolism. What was left of its power seemed trapped in museum displays and nostalgic documentaries. Yet somewhere within the machinery of decline, a few voices refused to surrender. They argued that technology could succeed where tradition had failed, that Britain didn't need to rebuild the empire to reclaim power, only reinvent how power worked. And quietly, that reinvention began. But even in decline, the blueprints for revival were being drawn. If you're enjoying this deep dive, please like the video and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more global insights. Now, back to the video. The world had already written Britain off. But as headlines mocked decline, the real story was being written in code, steel, and silence. In hidden hangars, underground test sites, and shipyards along the Clyde and Tyne, Britain began quietly re-engineering its future. There were no grand speeches, no Churchillian calls to arms, just a cold, deliberate realization. If the 20th century had ended Britain's empire, the 21st would rebuild its edge. It started with an audacious vision, a sixth-generation fighter jet that would make the world stop laughing. The Tempest wasn't just another aircraft, it was Britain's declaration that it would not be left behind in the age of AI and hypersonic warfare. Conceived in 2018, Tempest promised to fly faster, think smarter, and hit harder than anything before it. It would operate drones in combat, jam enemy radar, and even link to a pilot's neural signals. Rolls-Royce engineers worked on next-generation adaptive engines. BAE Systems integrated stealth and digital twin technologies that allowed the jet to train in virtual reality before it ever took off. The project wasn't only about military might. It was about restoring industrial confidence. Thousands of British scientists, coders, and machinists joined the program. The same nation once mocked for selling off its Harriers now led Europe's most advanced fighter initiative, outpacing France and Germany's rival project. The message was clear: Britain wasn't done flying. While the skies were being reimagined, Britain's seas were stirring. The Royal Navy, once a ghost of Trafalgar's glory, began rebuilding itself ship by ship. At the heart of this resurgence were two new classes of frigates, the Type 26 and Type 31. The Type 26, built for silent precision, could hunt submarines undetected across oceans, the submarine killer of the future. Each hull carried modular weapon bays, advanced sonar, and vertical missile launchers ready for any mission from escort to strike. The Type 31, faster and more flexible, was designed to show the flag in every corner of the globe. Affordable, exportable, and highly adaptable. It embodied Britain's modern strategy, global reach on a smart budget. Together they marked a new era. No longer a fleet of aging destroyers and borrowed carriers, but one that could deploy anywhere, from the Arctic to the South China Sea. Then came the weapon that sounded like a myth: DragonFire, a laser weapon that could shoot down drones and missiles at the speed of light, and for the cost of a few pounds per shot. The world dismissed it as science fiction until, in 2024, Britain's Ministry of Defense announced successful tests. DragonFire had struck moving aerial targets with surgical accuracy, making it one of the most advanced directed energy weapons on Earth. While rivals poured billions into traditional munitions, Britain was rewriting the laws of combat physics. The empire that once ruled through gunpowder was now perfecting warfare through photons, but the real shock came beneath the waves. In 2021, Britain joined the AUKUS pact, a trilateral defense alliance with the US and Australia. At its core, nuclear-powered submarines. For Britain, AUKUS wasn't just diplomacy, it was a strategic resurrection. The Royal Navy's new generation of submarines, drawing from US nuclear tech and British engineering, would allow the UK to project power across the Indo-Pacific for decades. It marked the return of Britain as a silent global hunter beneath the seas, unseen, unpredictable, and untouchable. Behind every ship, jet, and laser was a quiet defiance, a refusal to let history end the story of British military power. No press releases, no public spectacle. Just engineers and officers who knew that survival depended on innovation, not nostalgia. And when the world finally turned its eyes back to Britain, it didn't see a relic. It saw something reborn, sharper, faster, more ambitious than anyone imagined. What began in laboratories and dry docks soon started appearing on the world's oceans and radar screens. For decades, Britain's military map had been shrinking, its bases closing, its deployments retreating closer to home. The empire's once global footprint had faded to a European outline, but that's not the Britain the world sees anymore. Because while others argued over defense cuts, London quietly redrew its own map. And when it finally revealed the lines, they stretched across the globe. The rebirth began not in the tropics, but in the frozen silence of the north. In 2023, the Royal Marines opened Camp Viking in Norway, a forward base carved into the Arctic wilderness. Its purpose was clear: to anchor Britain permanently on NATO's northern frontier. From this icy fortress, British forces could move faster than ever across the high north, monitoring Russian submarine routes, training in sub-zero combat, and defending Europe's most fragile flank. Once Britain guarded empire trade routes through the Suez, now it guarded the world's new strategic highway, the Arctic. The symbolism was impossible to miss. After decades of retreat, Britain was once again building bases, not abandoning them. From the Arctic's chill to the Pacific's heat, Britain's global reach reawakened. When the HMS Queen Elizabeth carrier strike group sailed into the Indo-Pacific in 2021, it wasn't just a deployment, it was a statement. Escorted by destroyers, submarines, and jets, the Royal Navy cut through the South China Sea, a region increasingly dominated by Beijing's warships. No one had expected it. A post-Brexit Britain, once accused of turning inward, had suddenly become one of the few Western powers willing to challenge Chinese expansion directly at sea. British F-35s roared off carrier decks near disputed islands, flying alongside American, Japanese, and Australian pilots. The message was unmistakable. Britain was back. Not as a colonial force, but as a 21st century ally shaping Indo-Pacific security. And it didn't stop there. Britain signed new defense agreements with Japan, strengthened ties with Australia through AUKUS, and established rotational presences from Guam to Singapore. The same Navy that had once ruled the waves was now navigating new ones, this time through technology and diplomacy combined. At the heart of this resurgence were two colossal symbols of ambition: the HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales, Britain's twin aircraft carriers. Each was a floating city, bristling with sensors, F-35B stealth fighters, and strike capability unmatched in Europe. Together, they restored Britain's status as a blue water power, capable of launching operations anywhere on Earth without asking permission. Their deployments were not ceremonial. They integrated with NATO task forces, led maritime patrols in the North Atlantic, and projected force deep into the Indo-Pacific. For allies, they were reassurance. For adversaries, a reminder. The old Royal Navy that once seemed destined for decline had transformed into a modern expeditionary force, lean, lethal, and connected. Britain's strategy was now unmistakable. Global presence through interoperability. From the Arctic's frozen fjords to the coral seas of the Pacific, British boots, jets, and ships were back in motion, proving that reach, not size, defines modern power. The empire was gone. But the discipline, the logistics, and the instinct for global maneuver, those never died. They were simply waiting to be used again. Once again, the sun never set on British deployments. The country that once ruled the seas has now learned to rule the invisible. It began quietly with a single announcement in 2020, the creation of the National Cyber Force. To most, it sounded like bureaucratic jargon. To insiders, it was a revolution. This joint command between GCHQ and the Ministry of Defense fused the world of hackers and soldiers, offensive cyber operations, digital espionage, and real-time battlefield manipulation. The NCF's mission wasn't just to defend Britain's networks, it was to take the fight to enemy systems, power plants, missile silos, satellites. In an age where one keystroke can cripple a nation, Britain had built a weapon more potent than any bomb: access. Then came Cyber and Electromagnetic Command, Cyber-EM, a new branch integrating electronic warfare, radar deception, and AI-driven jamming. British cyber units could now blind enemy defenses before the first shot was fired. In war games, these invisible strikes proved devastating. Whole mock fleets vanished from radar before a single missile was launched. It was a message to both Moscow and Beijing. Britain no longer needed to match your divisions. It could disable them. But the digital frontier wasn't Britain's only secret weapon. In a world of hybrid warfare, where states fight through proxies and deniability, few units are as feared or as active as the SAS and SBS. Officially, they remain ghosts, their missions never acknowledged. Unofficially, they are everywhere. From Syria's deserts to Africa's jungles, from anti-ISIS operations to hostage rescues in Yemen, British special forces have quietly remained the West's most reliable strike asset. Their strength isn't numbers, it's precision. SAS teams now deploy alongside drones and satellite feeds, coordinating in real time with US Delta Force and Australia's Special Operations Groups. Their operations blur the line between human and machine warfare, supported by AI targeting, cyber infiltration, and live reconnaissance from space. The Special Boat Service, SBS, meanwhile, has turned into a maritime ghost fleet, conducting surveillance, sabotage, and underwater infiltration in some of the world's most contested zones, including the Black Sea and Persian Gulf. These aren't remnants of an old empire's pride. They're the proof that Britain, though smaller in size, still fights smarter and deadlier than most nations on Earth. Yet beneath all the new technology, one truth remains timeless. Deterrence still begins with the nuclear shadow. Britain's Dreadnought-class submarines, the next generation of its nuclear deterrent, are that shadow's new face. Each vessel, now under construction in Barrow in Furness, represents the pinnacle of stealth and survivability. Capable of operating undetected for months, these submarines will replace the aging Vanguard class by the 2030s, carrying Trident II D5 missiles and ensuring Britain's continuous at-sea deterrent. The policy that guarantees at least one nuclear-armed submarine is always hidden beneath the waves. But this time, deterrence isn't just about survival, it's about dominance in every domain. The dreadnoughts will integrate quantum navigation, AI decision systems, and electronic camouflage, making them not only invisible, but nearly untouchable. It's a cold reminder to adversaries. No matter how advanced cyber warfare becomes, Britain's ultimate guarantee remains unhackable: the ability to erase threats with one command. What's most striking isn't the technology, it's the philosophy. Britain's military renaissance isn't about returning to the old empire's muscle, it's about mastering the modern battlefield's mind. Every domain, sea, air, land, space, and cyber, is now woven into one network. Every decision, from a satellite ping to a submarine launch, can happen within seconds. This isn't the Britain of the past. It's a hyper-connected force built for tomorrow's chaos. And while Europe debated budgets, Britain quietly mastered the unseen dimensions of warfare. For years, Europe dismissed Britain's armed forces as a relic, professional but diminished, capable but overstretched. That illusion shattered the moment the numbers, capabilities, and deployments were compared side by side, because quietly, almost arrogantly, Britain has outpaced its continental rivals, not just in technology, but in readiness, global reach, and willpower. Germany may have Europe's largest economy, but on the battlefield, money means little without momentum. Berlin's Bundeswehr, long underfunded and fragmented, has struggled to turn its Zeitenwende pledge into real power. Tank shortages, ammunition deficits, grounded aircraft, the problems are chronic. In 2024, internal audits showed that less than 60% of German armored vehicles were operational, and that the Luftwaffe's Eurofighters suffered from spare part delays measured in years, not months. Meanwhile, Britain, despite its smaller economy, had already fielded 2 operational carrier strike groups, an integrated F-35 fleet, and deployable rapid reaction forces stationed across the globe. The British Army's 16th Air Assault Brigade and Ranger Regiment can deploy anywhere in 48 hours. Germany, by contrast, often requires weeks just to mobilize a single battalion for NATO duty. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it was British anti-tank missiles, not German tanks, that flooded Kiev first. The symbolism wasn't lost on Europe. In a moment of crisis, Britain acted while others debated. Readiness, not rhetoric, is what defines military power, and Britain proved it still has both. France, long Europe's other nuclear power, has traditionally seen itself as the continent's strategic anchor. But even Paris is feeling London's shadow again. The Tempest program, with its AI-driven cockpit, drone wingmen, and adaptive engines, has pulled ahead of France's rival FCAS fighter project, which remains mired in corporate disputes and design delays. While French engineers argue over leadership between Dassault and Airbus, BAE Systems is already testing digital twins and virtual design cycles that cut prototype timelines in half. At sea, the contrast is just as stark. France has 1 carrier, Britain has 2. France's nuclear submarines patrol regionally. Britain's operate globally under AUKUS and NATO tasking. In cyber warfare, France is catching up. Britain already leads. Even in arms exports, the UK has climbed to Europe's top spot, driven by contracts for the Type 26 frigate with Canada and Australia, and growing demand for its radar, engine, and missile systems across the Commonwealth. For Paris, this is unsettling. For London, it's vindication. Then there's NATO, where Britain's influence has quietly become foundational. In every major NATO deployment, from Estonia's enhanced forward presence to aerial policing in Eastern Europe, British forces are always among the first in and last out. While others debate spending targets, Britain consistently meets or exceeds the 2% GDP benchmark. It hosts US bases, intelligence hubs, nuclear integration sites, and leads Europe's Joint Expeditionary Force, a 10-nation coalition capable of immediate deployment without EU bureaucracy. When Washington calls for leadership in Europe, it's not Berlin or Paris that answers first, it's London. This isn't nostalgia for empire, it's modern practicality. In an era when European defense often feels paralyzed by committees and consensus, Britain acts like a military startup, smaller, faster, decisive. Across Europe's defense ministries, the mood is mixed: admiration, envy, and unease. Nobody expected Britain, post-Brexit and post-austerity, to re-emerge as Europe's most capable military. But the facts are undeniable. 2 operational aircraft carriers, the continent's most advanced cyber command, a nuclear deterrent on permanent patrol, the fastest developing 6th-generation fighter program, global deployments spanning 5 continents. In the language of modern strategy, Britain has achieved what its neighbors still dream of: full-spectrum capability. Europe's old assumption that Britain's power would fade while Germany's rose has been turned upside down. Now, the question isn't whether London can keep up with Europe, it's whether Europe can keep up with London. Europe's old balance of power has shifted, and few are ready to admit it. In an era of fractured alliances and rising autocracies, Britain has evolved into something larger than a nation-state, a force multiplier for the Western order. When Washington turns its focus toward the Pacific, London fills the Atlantic gap. When Europe hesitates, Britain deploys. When NATO needs a bridge between intelligence, cyber, and field operations, Britain becomes that bridge. This agility gives it an outsized voice in global strategy, from Ukraine's defense to Indo-Pacific deterrence. It's not about raw power, but strategic tempo, the speed at which a nation can sense, decide, and act. And by that measure, Britain is operating at superpower speed. Still, reality remains. Britain cannot outspend America, outbuild China, or outman Germany in manufacturing. Its armed forces, though elite, are lean, stretched across too many commitments, and its domestic politics often swing between ambition and austerity, threatening the very consistency that great powers depend on. For when crises erupt, whether in Europe's east or Asia's seas, Britain's ships, spies, and special forces are among the first to move, and when they move, others follow. Superpower? Maybe not yet, but the empire's descendants are acting like one. The world never expected it. For decades, Britain was the ghost of an empire, remembered, respected, but no longer feared. Yet while others wrote its obituary, it was busy rewriting its destiny. From the ashes of defense cuts and lost confidence rose a force reborn in silence, crafted not from nostalgia, but from precision and purpose. 6th-generation fighters, stealth frigates, laser weapons, nuclear submarines, the tools of a new age forged in old resolve. This wasn't a return to empire, it was something far more dangerous, a return to relevance. And when Britain finally stepped back into the light, deploying carriers across oceans, leading NATO battle groups, commanding cyber domains, the shock was global. The island that once ruled the seas has returned to shape them again. The empire may be gone, but Britain's power never left. It was merely waiting for the world to forget before reminding it who taught it what power truly means. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into geopolitics. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.